Steve Urszenyi, welcome to Suit Up the Podcast.
Terrence Leahy, thank you very much. Glad to be here.
It's an absolute pleasure. You have suited up, and I appreciate that. And you have a fantastic background behind you. One of the things I always am curious, like when I can read the titles, I see you have a Don Winslow book there. And I know that you have given him a shout out in the acknowledgments of Blood Oath. So I was just really curious. I've never read Don Winslow. Where would I
Ah,
start?
oh, wow. It's interesting because a lot of people like the Power of the Dog series, which I like as well. But my favorite Don Winslow book is The Force,
The
which
Force.
is a story about a New York City NYPD detective, essentially,
Hmm.
and his brush with the underworld and mingling with the underworld. I found The Force spoke more to me, probably because of my background,
Hmm.
etc. I loved his other books, the Power of the Dog, as I said, The Border, City in Ruins. If I've got that right, I can't remember. Maybe I'm thinking of Bruce Springsteen, but anyway. Yeah, Don's an awesome guy, and I wrote to Don some time ago, like when I was first beginning, so 5, 6 years ago, and he was just such a
Hmm.
genuinely kind and nice person, generous with his time. And of course, the rumors, not the rumors, the stories about Don, how he helped out writers like Adrian McKinty and
Hmm.
others are kind of legion. So yeah, Don's a great guy. I love his writing.
One of the great things I love about doing this show, just in general, is the writing community is really so awesome and supportive by and large. I think there's only one person I've ever emailed that did not have like the courtesy to reply back or anything like that. So that's really cool. We briefly touched on your background. Would you mind sharing just a brief biographical sketch with the audience?
Sure. I was born and raised in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. So that's where I live now. Born and raised here. Um, Spent my adult life and career as a paramedic
Hmm.
and a police tactical medic. So a paramedic working on police
Hmm.
special operations teams. Went from there to emergency management, where I ended up commanding the province of Ontario's medical disaster response team,
Wow.
responsible for everything from nuclear and radiation, chemical, biological, stuff like that. So that's where I was. In the meantime, my writing journey kind of wove in and out of my career, and I never, as much as I'd loved, and you're probably going to touch on this with other questions, but as much as I loved writing as a child, I never really
Hmm.
pursued it, and it was something I was dabbled in until about 10 or 15, probably 15 years ago, when I got more serious at it and began to do that more while on shift and things like that, and found that was a good way to distract myself on my days off and keep myself
Hmm.
busy. And then it developed into this love of writing, being a lifelong reader and someone who's loved the thriller genre, and before that, science fiction and fantasy. Even I really fell to a real love affair with the craft of writing.
Hmm. Well, that's where it's fascinating because if you look at those different genres, they each pull like this unique element of what makes good fiction and good writing. With fantasy and science fiction, really the world building is such an instrumental part of it. And actually,
Yeah.
that's one of the things I had to touch on about Blood Oath is you make Africa so vivid that it is its own character.
Well, thank you.
And it genuinely is one of the highlights in reading the book is just you're experiencing the dust. You're gazing across the Serengeti, and you really bring us to that moment, and it helps frame the entire story.
Thank you. That's high praise, and I really appreciate that. And I appreciate it so much because it's something I both consciously and subconsciously try to do. Because consciously, I want to bring the reader there.
Hmm.
I want people to experience what I experienced when I was there. Now, I was there on a safari. I wasn't hunting for my kidnapped father, thankfully, but my sensory awakening of Africa happened the moment we stepped off the plane.
Hmm.
In a very real moment, you smell Africa for the first time. Um, I don't know what it is. A blend of the dust and the sun and the coffee and the different things in the air. It was just amazing to me. So I wanted to bring the reader there. The subconscious part came from what we just talked about, my love of fantasy and science fiction early on, and writers like Frank Herbert, Isaac Asimov, Arthur C.
Hmm.
Clarke. These guys, these writers were building worlds where you were really in the moment with those writers. Every sense you had was activated in their writing or through their writing. And
Hmm.
I found that such a an addictive part of the process of being a reader. I loved going there with the writer. So as much as Hemingway is revered, and
Hmm.
um, he's a great, obviously one of the most iconic writers. He writes so lean, which appeals
Hmm.
to a lot of people, and certainly he can touch on the visceral. But I found I like writers who really bring us more sensoriness to their
Hmm.
stories, and I think that's what I, like I said, consciously and subconsciously try to emulate my own writing. So I'm glad you said that. And I'm having fun actually because 2019 is when we did our safari, thankfully before lockdown
Oh,
hit the
wow.
world.
Yeah.
So it was 6, 8 months before lockdown.
Hmm.
And that was a lifelong dream really of my wife, but I kept telling her all through our lives, this is your dream, let's go. And we finally did,
That's
right
awesome.
before the pandemic hit. So that was good timing really. But yeah, it's an amazing place. And actually the thing I don't mention really anywhere in my writing, including I have a newsletter series going right now where I bring my subscribers into it's an 8-week journey or an 8-part journey into our safari where I talk to them about our experiences on the safari and the sensory side. But what I've never mentioned before is that my parents, when they fled Hungary during the revolution in 1956, they first went to Austria, Vienna.
Hmm.
They actually weren't together. So my father escaped before my mother. He had just met. She was engaged to some other fella. He had to leave because the Russians were coming to get him because
Hmm.
of his active role in the revolution. And he wrote a letter to my mother, said, "Hey, you know, we had fun when we met. Do you want to come meet me in Vienna and we'll have a life together?" And she, at 21, said, "Sure, why not?" And dropped her life behind and tried 3 or 4 times to escape while being shot at by Russian soldiers. Finally escaped, and then they had to find each other in different refugee camps in Austria.
Oh,
Anyway, they
wow.
went on from there to live in Africa because they couldn't get a visa to the U.S. or Canada
Hmm.
at the time. So they lived in Africa, in Ghana. So my
Oh,
parents spent
cool.
their first 2 or 3 years out of Hungary in Ghana, where my oldest sister, was born. So there's a direct connection. She even has an African middle name. Her name is Afua, which means born on Friday for girls. So there's a definite connection to Africa for me, but I didn't build that part into the story.
Okay, so genuine question. When you hear family stories like that, do you sit there and go, could I turn this into a book? Like, has that floated around in your mind
Oh,
at
I've
this
thought
point?
about, and yeah, and people have said so many times to me, my mother's story by itself. I mean, she's still alive, God bless her. She's going to be 91 in February. Hope she doesn't mind me saying that, but she's 90 now. Um,
Congratulations. Like,
Thank you.
genuinely an
Yeah.
achievement.
And she is at 21. Imagine, they lived through a revolution. My dad
Yeah.
was an active participant, got away with his life. My mom took the adventure, the gamble of her life by launching out on this adventure to meet my dad in a refugee camp. And then they go to Africa. I mean, there's a real story there, but maybe I'm too close and I don't know
Hmm.
what the trajectory of the story is yet. Because
Hmm.
certainly I wouldn't want to make it autobiographical.
Yeah.
It's not the story of Steve. It's a
Hmm.
story of my
Hmm.
parents or my mom. So where would I take that story? I've never really sat down to try to work it out, but I have thought of that. And one of these days I'll have to make sure I take all the appropriate notes from my mom so I don't miss anything important,
Hmm.
come the day when I write that movie or that book.
Well, it feels like that perfect like Cold War adventure backdrop that
Yeah.
like you know what they say, there's that beautiful line in Sherlock Holmes where if you peeked underneath the roofs of everyone's homes and saw it actually happened, it would be more remarkable than fiction or anything you could make up.
Yeah, and then the interesting thing to me has always been, I think of how remarkable my parents' story is, and I think they're just two people.
Hmm.
out of hundreds of thousands or millions around the world who've lived similarly adventurous lives or traumatic lives and
Hmm.
survived and made a different life for them and their families. I mean, that's the beauty of living in Canada and the
Hmm.
US is that people come from these genuinely horrific backgrounds. Not that my parents, I wouldn't describe it as horrific necessarily. So many people lived through the Second World War,
Hmm.
then went on through other traumas and conflict zones. We know there's conflicts going on now around the
Hmm.
world. And then to come here to kind of a world of peace where we look at each other, we don't see the conflict that people left or the trauma that they left. And there's so many stories like that. It's
Hmm.
really inspiring to see that in people. And there are just so many stories.
Hmm. And to that point, like you make a comment about Africa, I think two or three times in the story that I thought was interesting because it's almost like that as the continent in some ways, where it's the graveyard of empires. And I love that line as a summary of what colonialism unfortunately did to Africa in a lot of places in a lot of ways. Even dating back, I'm big fan of ancient history. I've just finished stuff on the Carthaginians and Hannibal. And when you
Hmm.
realize the north part of Africa was from the very beginning, the Phoenicians went, we're going to build Carthage.
You're right.
And it's just that's been a thing for so long. And there's so many of these empires that didn't last, that had their start there.
Well, and yeah, I mean, it's interesting, of course, because we know that the Rift Valley is the birthplace of humanity,
Hmm.
mankind, humankind, bipedal, people. So the ability of people to walk upright and evolve into what we are now all started in the Rift Valley in Africa. And actually, we visited that site when we were there,
Hmm.
where those origins were first discovered.
And used
Uh,
as an excellent action set piece, by the way.
oh, thank you. Yeah, and it's interesting because um, Africa has endured so much from
Hmm.
colonialism onwards, but it's not over.
Hmm.
One of the things I try to make clear without browbeating the reader is that there's still conflict going on. There's still a battle for hearts and minds and resources and wealth
Hmm.
going on now. And the major powers, China, Russia, the US, they're all embroiled in fighting for, I mean, the cynic would say, well, it's greed. They're fighting for money and wealth. And yeah, okay, yeah, that's the backdrop of it. And certainly some people are motivated by that, but Africa is a really important place
Hmm.
for whichever power or powers will continue to be the superpowers. So it's strategically important. It's because of the location. It's strategically important because of the wealth and resources. And it has so many of the things we need to keep our technologically driven societies humming and moving forward.
Hmm.
So, yeah, the battles in Africa didn't end after colonialism ended in the 50s and 60s or whenever for different countries, but it's an interesting place.
Hmm. Again, Blood Oath was a delightful story. Obviously, this wasn't the first of Alex Martel's stories, and we touched on a little bit just before we clicked record, just names. And I think that's always fascinating to see how names evolve, not just for people, but also characters. Where did Alexandra Martel's name come from? Because Martel is a really classic name. I was like, oh, that's nice, that's strong.
Well, a funny story. Um, the first time a character like Alex Martel appeared in my writing was about, uh, I think, 2014,
Hmm.
about 10, 11 years ago, in a screenplay I had started, where it was essentially the beginning of Alex, the beta tester version of
Hmm.
Alex, and her name was Rachel Danaher.
Okay. Ooh,
And just
Danaher. Nice.
Danaher. So just because she was an Interpol investigator in Amsterdam investigating a crime, a body found in a canal, that was the roots, the genesis of Alex. When I started writing the Alex Martel story, I know I had lots of different names or several different names. I don't remember at what point I settled on Alex Martel, other than to say, I actually have a friend. I don't think she'll mind if I mention her name is Cynthia Martel, and she is a former paramedic colleague of mine in Toronto. And something about the name, and then Alex Martel, it was rhythmic. So people will be disappointed to find that I didn't actually connect Charlemagne and King, Charles the Hammer with the name until last year. I was having dinner, I was having pizza with Mark Cameron, a fantastic New York Times bestselling author. He lives in Alaska and he came to BoucherCon last year in Nashville. And we were having dinner together, pizza, and he asked me a question about, or maybe he said, I love the name Martel, the fact that you use that bit of history. And I just had a blank expression on my face, which is awful because I actually pride myself as being a bit of a historian, Renaissance history, medieval history. It never occurred to me when I was writing the story that Martel was, the grandson I even forget the lineage right now of Charlemagne.
Yeah.
And Martel meaning the hammer in French, or at least Old French. So it was that's where the name came from. It was purely acoustic, if you want to call it that. It sounded good. And it just happens. When I tell the story now, though, I'll never admit to not knowing that. It was planned all along. It was the hammer, Alex the Hammer,
Alex the Hammer.
Alex the Hammer. That's where it came from. So, but that is the actual origin story of that name.
That is so cool. And I think that honestly, like I love the history bit that I'm a fan, like I said, of more ancient history. So I'm Martel, I'm like, oh, cool, Charlemagne. And I do know that you are a guy who knows his history and does his research. So I was like, clearly this is a connection. But the acoustics of a name is one of the most
Mhm.
underrated things. When people looking at a name on paper is a different experience than saying it.
Yeah,
And you can go
completely.
with like the perfect, like it looks great name that then it's said and you're like, no, that doesn't work.
No, exactly. Yeah, I love, the truth is, I get most of my names, and I've said this before, but when I'm looking for a name, you know, Perfect Shot took place in France. There was
Mhm.
Turkey, there was Russia, London, England. Um, Out in the cold, there's Finnish elements that took place a lot in Helsinki. Much of the story was set in Helsinki in Finland. So when I'm looking for names, backgrounds of people, I tend to go to international ice hockey rosters and international football or soccer rosters. So I pull, if I'm looking for a Spanish name,
Mhm.
I'm not going to try to guess
Yeah.
a Spanish name or something of Basque origin or whatever. I'll go to, the roster for the football teams or the hockey teams and say, okay, and I'll pick two names and I'll
Hmm.
use the first name of one and the last name of another and combine them. And I get some names. Sometimes I'll use a real name from history. Grasimov
Hmm.
in Perfect Shot, General Grasimov or Colonel Grasimov in the story is I stole the name from the Russian general who was Putin's essentially right hand man for the longest time leading up to Ukraine. So I do occasionally will steal a name from history, et cetera, or try to work out some way to work somebody into a story that way, especially if I
That's
don't like them.
yeah, that's really cool. I know I've talked about this with Eric P. Bishop. He's made the comment if it's a throwaway character, he'll just pick like someone in real life. If they're okay with it, he'll just
Yeah,
give them a cameo. Have you done
yeah,
that in any of your stories?
yes, I have. So in Perfect Shot, you'll come across a pilot by the name of Jack Stewart. You probably
Ah!
know Jack Stewart, the author. So Jack's a good friend of mine. And in book two, and Out in the Cold, President Taylor Moore is named after the author Taylor Moore, who's another friend of mine. So Taylor lives in Amarillo, Texas, but he became, with his permission, he became
Mhm.
the president of the United States. He got a bit of a promotion from writing and from his own past. So I do try to, as well as there's another recurring character, Jonathan Burgess,
Mhm.
who didn't, I can't, I don't think he doesn't actually appear in Blood Oath.
Mhm.
And sometimes I'm fuzzy because sometimes they do for a while and they come out of the final copy or whatever. But
Yeah.
Jonathan Burgess is the Interpol IT security expert through Perfect Shot and Out in the Cold, and that's based on a friend of mine, someone who worked for me as our IT security person when I was the commander of the province's disaster response team. He is and was just a brilliant IT guy and computer guy, and with his permission, I've named the character after him. So Jonathan Burgess is an all around nice guy and a great character in the first two books.
That's awesome. We touched a little bit on this, your background in the medical field with specifically being a medic. is one of the things that I really enjoyed about Blood Oath because it brings those actual, like, you know, a lot of adventure fiction or thrillers. It's like, oh, they got shot. And depending on the degree to which the author is comfortable, they will give more detail or less. But
Mhm.
you do a great job of giving us enough detail to feel what's happening, and not only that, what the effects of that is in a way that puts you present with it. And it does make it more in the moment and more personal.
Yeah, I try to when I write, what's the word? Authenticity. I was
Hmm.
drawing a blank on that word. Authenticity in writing, factualness in writing. I find that very important. So I do immerse myself in research in general. So even if I don't know something, I try to learn much more. And I'm getting better at not dumping everything I learned into a story. But whatever you learn, I'm writing two things right now that I'm doing a lot of research on. And even though I'm not writing specifically those things, the
Hmm.
research I've done informs the
Hmm.
writing and the story. It has to. When it comes to my lived experience, for 40 years, I worked in the medical space as a medic, as a tactical medic, as a commander of a medical disaster response team. So it's natural. The two things that I excelled at for 40 years were coping with crises, emergencies,
Hmm.
and doing the medical side of an emergency response. So it would be almost hypocritical. There was at some point, I always said I didn't want to write a medical thriller. Turns out I'm
Hmm.
kind of writing something on in that space now. But it's because it's too close to home. And I'm
Yeah.
sure, there's a lot of people who don't want to write in the
Hmm.
same world they live in and inhabit.
Hmm.
But when it came to the medical side, I thought the best way I could honor my past and the reader was to give Alex the skills and the ability, the knowledge, skills, and ability, and the expertise to look seamless, to look like she's not putting any effort into what she's doing. So whether
Hmm.
that's applying a tourniquet out of something that she's improvised, whatever it is, I try to bring that into it, and I try to do it seamlessly. I don't want to lambaste the reader with tons of detail,
Yeah.
just enough that they understand,
Hmm.
or they not that they understand. I don't want them to understand cardiology, but I want them to see the effects of
Hmm.
something, and I want them to understand Alex's comfort and
Hmm.
familiarity with the subject matter. And that's what I strive for. So hopefully I get that.
Hmm. Well,
Get that right. That is.
you do a great job of you use moments like that so beautifully to depict who Alex is. It's those character moments, and that's what I enjoyed in Blood Oath. You give us that action scene at the beginning of the story that helps establish her relationships between all the characters and that she's competent, that she's skilled, and what her skill set is. So it sets really everything up for the rest of the story. And that's not always easy to do. Like it's very much a skill and art, and I think you threaded the needle well.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate that. I mean, it's not easy to do, but it's part of the craft, and I focus
Hmm.
on that. I mean, again, I go back to I've had great influences as a writer. I've had great influences in the reading I've done, going back to these great authors over the
Hmm.
years. So Robert Ludlum, Tom Clancy, um, again, Frank Herbert and the Dune trilogy, what I call the trilogy, even though it's like however many
Yeah.
books. The first three are the most important to me. Um, they all built those worlds and they all made us believe, again, Robert Ludlum, Tom Clancy, they made us believe those characters were competent and
Hmm.
knew what they were doing and had the background. You believed in them because there's no point me writing their resume on page 3.
Yeah.
You won't believe it, right? It's always better to show than to tell. We all know
Hmm.
that. And you have to, and actually, this is a lesson I learned, and I'm going to give a shout out to Ryan Steck.
Hmm.
Ryan, everybody knows the real book spy. Ryan Steck is a friend of mine. He was also somebody I hired as an editor when I was working on my very first Alex Martel book, which
Hmm.
is on the shelf behind me that never got published, that first one, by a long shot. Um, and he was Ryan as an editor for me wasn't so much about dissecting my story and line by line edits or even story development or developmental story edits. He wasn't that so much as a writing mentor
Hmm.
because he's such that he's a font of wisdom and knowledge in the thriller genre. He was able to say, if I had a chapter that was heavy in description, and telling, he would say, you're better to show the reader this particular thing or that, show them doing that thing, make her chase after the guy or whatever it was. And Ryan really helped me take what I had learned as a reader by seeing
Hmm.
it in books and reading it in books and translate that now into, sometimes it's lazy. We want to give people knowledge. So we do clumsy exposition by telling all through the,
Hmm.
the book. But Ryan made me really focus on showing through the book. Don't be lazy. Get into the action. Readers want to see this. And maybe it wasn't lazy so much as I didn't think the reader want to see this. They just want to know this and move on.
Hmm.
When in fact, Ryan and others helped show me it's not so much that they just don't, they want to see it. They want to, that's how they will become intimately aware of Alex's skills or any other character's skills is by seeing them do that rather than having someone say, "Oh, they're a good shot. Oh, good. I saw them do this in a competition once." That doesn't sell it. What sells it is when she picks up a rifle and picks on a target, distances, ranges the target, and takes all those sniper factors into account and makes the shot. That's what readers actually want to see
Hmm.
clearly. So,
It's the parts that we love in the action movie. It's the parts we love reading is I think that thriller genre especially, like all books, we like characters that are competent. We'll forgive a lot of things. Well, the reason we like a lot of bad guys is because they're good at what they do. But seeing a character be good at what they are. And to that point, I love the dynamics between Alex and her dad. Especially at the beginning
mhm.
of the story, you really establish their dynamic. And you see that her dad is someone who's been around the block before. And even as the story progresses, we see that he's a man who's capable, who's done stuff. He's lived a life before this story. A question I specifically had here was how much of Alex's backstory, because you go into a little bit of detail into her at like age 11, how much of that was something you knew about with the other books, like that you had as this is Alex's backstory versus, okay, why would Alex make this choice then and discovering this is her backstory?
Yeah. The it's funny because you when you create a character, they're very two-dimensional in the beginning.
Hmm.
It's my first memory of Alex as a character is her walking across a plaza, a piazza, whatever you want to call it, an open space on the way into Interpol headquarters in The Hague, eating a strawberry parfait, um, wind blowing in her hair, cursing a little bit at how it's a miserable day out, pulling even though it's cold and windy in The Hague, she's wrapping her coat. I mean, so it's a you're forming images, you're getting snapshots, but I still didn't know who she was. So then you have to develop, as you're alluding to, you have to start to develop that backstory, which then informs the backstory informs the present story in
Hmm.
so many ways. But for Alex, it was a long time before I had all the pieces in place. Um, with book one, it took a while for me to get to how does Alex have the skills she has?
Hmm.
And I had to make the circumstances up. I had to invent the circumstances. And to a certain extent, I don't know if you know Joshua Hood,
Hmm.
another great writer. Josh and I had a chat years ago about what kind of military background could Alex have had that could give her the skills she has today.
Hmm.
And did it have to be U.S. military? Could it have been something else? So could her origins have been Israeli army,
Hmm.
Canadian army, whatever it was? So, it took a while, but I actually had Alex initially as a sniper.
Hmm.
But then I realized that's not going to fly because it's not that believable. In the timeline that Alex was supposed to have gotten her skills, today it's
Hmm.
a different story.
Yeah.
More doors are open to women in the military
Hmm.
than they were 10, 15 years ago. But when Alex's backstory was forming, she could not have gone to sniper school and done many of the things that make her who she is. So I had to come up with a way that was believable. So she was a combat medic, made perfect sense.
Hmm.
I'm a medic. I made her a medic. Her mom was a doctor. Again, it made sense. Put her in the role of a medic. Well, how did she become a sniper? And I have that happen through fortune or misfortune when she's on deployment as a combat medic, and
Hmm.
she falls into a role where she's forced to pick up a sniper rifle because of the operator she's with being injured. She has to pick up the rifle to save some of her platoon. So that's the story. And I've already forgotten this. Oh, yeah, so really it comes to it's an evolution over a series of books. By the time I got to book three, I pretty much knew who she was, but there's still some surprises even to me. The concept of the blood oath, without giving
Hmm.
anything away, it had to kind of come organically. And how would that happen for Alex with her background, with her father, with her mother, with her upbringing? Um, it's developed over obviously the last three books and the
Hmm.
forerunner to them all, the first one. It takes a while, and you can jot all the notes you want, but ultimately, as you're reading, the
Hmm.
characters will dictate a lot of what happens and a lot of their own stories and backstories. So it's fun because I try to keep my ears open, figuratively speaking, when I'm writing for cues that come from the characters or the scene that's evolving and
Hmm.
listen to that and then build something in. Both Caleb and Alex, or Alex and Caleb being her sidekick, your CIA sidekick, her boss actually. Um, I I tried to put a lot of my own experiences with the dark side of, trauma
Hmm.
from the job. Those experiences that every medic, every police officer, every firefighter, everybody's seen action in the military, whatever. There's traumatic experiences that happen that we compartmentalize and put away. I try to bring those out a little bit in my characters. So
Hmm.
Alex gets, when we see those moments, that's me shedding a little bit of my own character in through Alex. When we see some of what Caleb experiences, and more of that really happened in the first book, Perfect Shot, where we're more aware of his interiority, his thinking, and his feeling. That's opportunities for me to build his character, but informed
Hmm.
by my own experiences. So again, it's a combination of things, but a lot of it is listening to what the story and the characters demand in the moment as I'm writing.
Hmm. There was a book I was writing, One Man's Treasure, my adventure novel. There's a moment where a character, like, I kept having to rewrite the scene. And I'm like, why isn't the scene clicking? And it finally occurred to me, it's because this character wants to do something else than what I'm trying to force at this point.
Right.
And I feel like that happens no matter if you're a plotter or a pantser. Inevitably, especially if you've created a character of depth, they it will ring hollow when you start writing something that doesn't fit with who they are.
Yeah, and it's really funny as you mentioned, when you can't make them do what you want them to do. And people will go, "That's stupid. You're the writer. Like, just write it." But it is so true. As a writer, my wife, her name is Lynn. She laughs when I come out of the office some days, and I'll say, "Lynn, you'll never guess what Alex did today." And she'll say to me, "You realize you're the writer. Like, why is this a surprise to you?" But as you mentioned, you can't force your characters to do something that's not part of who they are. And they do take on a life of their own and a character and a personality all their own. And as a writer, as you just said there, you have to listen to that. And you can't go against that because if you do force something, that's a hallmark of bad writing. And
Hmm.
there's not a reader around who won't pick up on that. And I mean, they can't help it.
Hmm.
They become familiar and engrossed in those characters and invested in their lives and their experiences. So when something happens that's out of place for that character, they'll know it. And it takes away from the genuineness of that moment of that character. So yeah, you hit it on the head with that.
It
And
re
those are the fun moments.
They really are because it makes the story feel alive. Like you are giving these characters life in a certain
Yeah.
way. And it's cool to when you start seeing them actually take on their own characteristics. Just out of curiosity, is there any specific moment that Alex that you remember has defied you and what you have tried to lead her towards?
Um, I'm sure I know the answer is yes, but I've just eventually listened to her and done what she said I should do. Yeah, there are times. Well, let's put it this way. I threw out about 80 pages in the opening of my second book, in the
Oh,
opening of Out
wow.
in the Cold,
Hmm.
all because I wanted us, us, me, Alex, Caleb, and company. I wanted us to go. Well, I'll say it. I wanted us to go to Monaco. There was a whole
Hmm.
scene where
Oh.
they're
Hmm.
sailing along the Mediterranean. They're heading for Monaco. They're going to go to a reception at the Prince of Monaco's castle, his
Hmm.
house. There's a big reception going on. Then there's a scene in the casino.
Classic
All of
spy
those
stuff.
classic spy stuff, and all of that was two things. One, I had tried to outline the story, whereas I'm a pantser.
Hmm.
So I had that was in my outline. So I was working from my outline moving forward. But not only that, I wasn't listening to what the story needed and what Alex needed. And there's that weirdness again. But Alex didn't need to go to Monaco. She needed to do something else.
Hmm.
Um, so there are, that's probably one of the biggest examples where I literally had to take 60, 80 pages or more and literally throw them out.
That's painful.
It was very painful, but it made the story hopefully
Hmm.
better in the end.
Hmm.
Um, I listened to the characters. I listened to their needs. I didn't try to force the story, shoehorn the story into something I wanted to do.
Hmm.
I had to do something that was natural for the story and the evolution of the story. So, I wish I could think of a better example where she's defied me, but that's
That's a great one, though, because
yeah.
really, again, it's creating the story and the context. And I find it fascinating that you obviously do a lot of research, which I would assume correlate to you have this meticulous outline of items that you like try to hit, or okay, I need this fact here, but you're a pantser. Like, how
I'm
does that dichotomy work for you?
yeah, it's so, I start a story by when I start a story, it's a little different now. I'm trying to become more, as I'm moving into my next projects, I'm trying to become more of a plotter.
Hmm.
Now, that still leaves a lot of room for pantsing along the way. But in the Alex Martel stories, I started with scenes in my head.
Hmm.
Alex laying, so in Out in the Cold, she's laying on her belly. Sorry, in Perfect Shot, she's laying on her belly, looking through a forest at a runway, a disused runway in the Netherlands. That's all I could see initially. And
Hmm.
literally everything comes from that. Same with Blood Oath. She's crawling through the grass in the opening scene. She's looking
Hmm.
at something through a lens. We don't know what it is. That's how I start, and that's how the story begins. Um, so the research comes as a story exposes itself to me.
Hmm.
I then know that I have to know more about this next
Okay.
thing. And
Hmm.
what is that thing? So I'll bump up against something that I have to learn about. Then
Hmm.
I'll frantically and furiously research for a while. And I mean, my notes at the beginning of the story, I have zero notes, none. I have a title, I have a working title. That's it. By the end of the story, I have about 70 to 80 pages roughly of notes, research, things like that. So as I go, I fill the research up and I
Hmm.
can refer to that later. So the research comes along the way. And then afterwards, in the editing process as well, sometimes I can't get to a place
Hmm.
until after I've written the story. So Perfect Shot, Out in the Cold, they were both written or they're both researched on site, like in
Hmm.
Helsinki and London and Paris, wherever, after the story was written. That allowed me to change some things and make it better and stronger. Out in the Cold, sorry, Blood Oath,
Hmm.
that research was done obviously 6 years before now. So, but the research comes really as I move forward through the story and identify exactly what it is I need to know and exactly what it is I need to bring into the story for the reader.
Hmm. I'm curious, you've done a great job of on the ground, boots on the ground, visual, seeing the places, experiencing the experiences as much as you can. Are there places you've traveled that you want to eventually use for locations and stories, like, say, Monaco? Or are there bucket list items you're like, I really think that going here would be amazing, and it also might make a good story?
Yeah, so there's again, I'm working on something now that I can't talk about quite yet, but um, I haven't been there yet. So it's set in a part of Europe
Hmm.
where I've been around that area, a particular
Hmm.
area, but not there yet.
Hmm.
So that will be something I'm writing now. And again, it's going to be have to be something that I research in person, hopefully sooner rather than later. But as far as places I've been that I want to set a story, there aren't really at this moment there are not places I've been that I want to set a story. So it's going to be the other way around, or as Lynn has said to me, she'll tell me the places that I'm going to write about. Because if we're doing research trips to support the story, there's going to be more stories in the Bahamas, yeah, on the Yucatan Peninsula, places like that. So that might
I
have
would
a bigger
love to read
influence.
your Thunderball for the record.
Yeah, that would be fun. That'd be fun.
So, one of the questions I love to ask writers is if you have a writing routine. We've talked a bit about what your process is, but do you have a routine for your writing? And if so, what does that look like?
My routine is I'm a night owl. I've always been a night owl. I always preferred, when I was a paramedic, we worked 12-hour shifts.
Hmm.
I always preferred the 12-hour night shift to the 12-hour
Oh.
day shift, largely because I'm not a morning person. I
Hmm.
don't wake up at 5 in the morning happily, or even 7 in the morning. So, so my writing process over the years, so because I was working full time so I was working as a shift worker, I guess. I had no process. I wrote when I
Hmm.
could.
Hmm.
And then I left the road, so to speak, in 2014 and became an office worker when I was a commander of that
Hmm.
team. And that was more or less a 9 to 5 job when we weren't on deployment or away on training. And I would work during the day, come home at night, start writing about 4 or 5 in the afternoon, stop for dinner, write till about 8 or 9 at night. That became my habit and my process. And I've stuck with that.
Awesome.
I've tried to shift the clock back to write in the morning, early afternoon. I can't do it. I can spend hours in front of the computer.
Hmm.
Nothing will emerge on a screen. I'll be surfing the web. I'll be reading. I'll be doing everything but writing. But bang, 4 o'clock comes around and I'm frantically writing my story. So the process has been and continues to be that I write in the late afternoon to evening hours. And sometimes, the wee hours of the morning, as in before I go to bed, rather than
Hmm.
waking up early. So I would say that's my process, as it were. But other than that, I'm a pantser for the most part. I research when I can. I try to read when I can. I mean, as a writer, we have to keep up on
Hmm.
our as well. And I try to read off genre as well. So I read a lot of my contemporaries, my friends, Simon Gervais, Mark Rainey, Ryan Steck, Jack Stewart, Brad Thor. Those are almost a must read. It's
Hmm.
entertainment, but it's also a must read because a lot of the craft is informed by how
Hmm.
people are writing today. But I also like to go back and read, Conclave, the Pope
Hmm.
story, the Vatican story, or
Ooh, yes.
I read The Bridges of Madison County over
Oh,
the summer.
really?
So a romance, basically.
So the irony is, just to throw it out there, I live in Iowa like 10, 15 minutes away from the bridges of Madison County,
Oh, wow.
ironically enough. So I have seen them. There are bridges there.
Wow, that's fascinating. No, yeah, I thought it was, I don't know why. Well, actually, I do know why. I was struck by a line. I was reading Conclave,
Uh-huh.
and I was struck by the relationship of two of the characters in the story. One of the cardinals, the main character in the book, he's called Lomelli. I can't remember what his name is in the movie. And the Mother Superior figure, Sister Agnes.
Hmm.
And there's a scene in the book, and it's purely platonic. It's a relationship based on respect. But he has one line in that novel, and all through the novel, we see what an ethical, upstanding citizen and moral character he is as a priest, as a bishop, as a cardinal,
Hmm.
and in his role in the Vatican during the conclave. And so we know what a great and honorable man he is. And this sister, there's one line because he's been working with her side by side to do something. And he says, if I had married, this is the kind of woman I hope I would have found, or something to that effect. And I was so, because you follow this relationship.
Hmm.
It's purely
Yeah.
platonic, but you follow this relationship based on respect and admiration of competence more than anything else. And then you hear that one line, you think, wow, what a story behind the story that could be. And that made me want to read The Bridges of Madison County, get behind a real, one of the genres and one of
Mhm.
literature's greatest romance stories. So I read that, and I was really impressed by the story and the writing, and I really enjoyed it. So it was
Mhm.
nice to go off genre for a change and pick up something I would not normally read and really revel in the writing.
Anytime I look at my reading list and I realize that every book that I've read has been for the podcast, I'm like, I need to pick something, infuse a little something unique, something different, something off-brand. And usually it is picking like a romance novel or a sci-fi novel or something just a little different.
Yeah.
Uh, One comment I also wanted to make is your books have amazing covers. Like, how much did you have to speak into that design? Because the cutouts just, it's so stark. I love. I feel like we're hitting a renaissance of book covers again, where for a while every thriller cover looked the same.
Yeah.
And now, like, oh my goodness, look at that sexy book there.
Yeah. That is a that's a great book, great spine. I think it's awesome. So I'd like to take some credit. I won't take any. The extent of my input has been Minotaur Books, St. Martin's Press. They've been fantastic. So with Perfect Shot,
Hmm.
they came to me and said, "Do you have any ideas for covers?" And I basically said, I deferred. I said, "Well, you guys are the professionals.
Hmm.
I'm the writer, but here's some ideas." And all I gave them were, I kind of like bold, strong colors, vivid
Hmm.
colors. Um, Kind of all I said. And I sent them 3 or 4 samples of book covers I did
Hmm.
not like.
Oh,
So
good.
2 or 3 covers I liked.
Yeah.
Um,
But it
uh,
also tells them very clear at that point, these are the types I don't want, which
yeah.
helps them immensely because then they know, oh, all of those factors weeded out.
So the truth is, each one of those covers, those 3 books, I'm getting thumbs up. You got to love Zoom. Each one of those covers was their first attempt. So
Wow.
they sent me Perfect Shot. I looked at it
Hmm.
and I went, that's perfect. Blood Oath or Out in the Cold, same thing. Blood Oath, same thing. Their art department just nailed it immediately. And I get compliments on the covers all the time. I can't take any credit, but I'm so happy and pleased. And I mean, I tell my editor and the art team, well, through my publicist and my marketing guy, pass on my praise because these
Hmm.
covers, they nail it. They're just so dead on perfect for the story. And I get so much positive feedback from readers. So yeah, I love the covers. They're awesome. They're really good.
Hmm. It helps setting like the theme and telling people this is the unique. I'm a big fan of Soho Press. Generally, has done a good job of the Billy Boyle stories written by mysteries by James R. Benn.
Hmm.
They vary each book. You know, just looking at the cover, it's a Billy Boyle mystery. And you guys have done that so well with the Alex Martel books, where I immediately look at them like, oh, that's an Alex Martel thriller. I can't confuse it with anything else. It's
Yeah.
just starkly perfect.
I know I'm looking over my shoulder at the books and I'm just, we're just so pleased with those covers. And yeah, kudos to the art department and the graphics team at St. Martin's and Minotaur Books. They've done a fantastic job. So thank you for pointing that out, and I will mention that to them again.
You can tell them review Terrence Leahy's podcast. Perfect covers.
Yeah, totally.
Steve, this has been a great conversation. Where can people go to learn more about you, your book, and when can they get Blood Oath and from where?
So people can find me on the web at steveurszenyi.com. Just look at the spelling on the covers because it's not the simplest name in the world. But steveurszenyi.com. All my social media handles are at Steve Urszenyi. Um, Blood Oath comes out on the 18th of November.
Coming up.
I'm not sure when this episode will air, but 18th of
Should be the
November is
Sunday before.
so yeah, 18th of November, Tuesday, obviously. Um, I'll be at the Poison Pen in Scottsdale the night before pub day. So November
Awesome.
17th, I'll be there with Ryan Pote.
Hmm.
I think you interviewed Ryan
Yes.
actually,
Tell
Blood and
Ryan I
Treasure.
said hi.
I will do that. The two of us are appearing together at the Poison Pen with with Barbara. And yeah, so people, if they look me up, they can find me. By all means, send me a note, send me an email. I love to hear from readers. Um, this has been fantastic, Terrence. I've really enjoyed myself.
Awesome. Thank you again for coming on the show, and I will link everything in the show notes. People can drop down, click the links. Steve, it's been a blast.
Me too. Thanks so much.